time. Got your honor your time commitment, and we're really glad that you're here. With me today, my name is Kathy Thornton, and I am the grant review chair for Impact 100. And with me today, Sarah Grace Moore is our tech chair and past president, and Jenny Berg, who is one of our committee focus area committee chairs, as well as being a past president. So you have lots of folks who know some stuff and hopefully can answer any questions that you have. We have made some big changes to our letter of intent this year, resulting from feedback that we have received about duplication and replication and so forth. So you'll find the application, if you haven't already taken a look, to be a little bit more straightforward, we hope, and will be an easy approach for you as you think about the idea that you have for potentially submitting an application. So Sarah Grace, if you could put up the PowerPoint, we'll get started with just a little bit of background, just to kind of remind all of us where we are. This is our question and answer session. We started doing this last year following our letter of intent training, because it gave folks an opportunity to ask very specific questions. So you will have a chance either by putting questions in the chat, or later on we'll actually open the conversation. You can unmute and ask questions together, so that everybody can hear your questions. Just a reminder, as Impact 100, we have been in existence since 2001, and we are a group of women who each contribute $500 or $1,000 to what becomes our $100,000 grant pool. So as you can imagine, the more folks that we have join us, the greater number of grants that we can offer. So we are in our membership drive. So if you have the opportunity to spread the word, we'd be grateful to do that. Okay, Sarah Grace. So the purpose of today's session is we're going to do a very quick review of the letter intent and grant cycle, sort of address a few common questions that have come up, and then answer any questions that you may have, and then just a reminder about submitting your letters of intent and so forth. Okay. So just as a reminder, and we like to remind people of this because it is a super long grant timeline. So our intention is for $100,000 impactful grants, but our cycle takes a long time. So we are in November, of course, and we are having the various information sessions to help you determine whether this is a good process for you. And then our letters of intent are due on December the 17th. In January, we announce how many grants we'll be able to award based on the number of members that we get in for 2022. I have to get used to saying 2022. In February, our grant review committees review the letters of intent, and we advance several for each committee to the full grant phase. In years past, we used to require the full grant, and it's a lot more in detail. So if you think about your letter of intent as being kind of an introductory idea to the grant review teams to talk about what it is you want to do. If you are invited to submit a full grant application, we look more deeply at your financials, for example. We ask you to develop your ideas just a little bit more, answer a few additional questions that we may have. And those applications will be due in March. In April and May, we review the grant awards, the grant applications, and then we do site visits to a fewer number. And then in June, we name our finalists. And in September is our annual awards celebration. Following the awards of our grants, we then come up with contracts about when you will receive payments and what kind of reporting is due. So it is almost a full year cycle. So it's a long cycle. So just kind of keep this in mind as you think about jumping in. Okay. So the basic components of the letter of intent, hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at it, but just to kind of review, your organizational information is pretty straightforward. The one thing that we want to emphasize is you want to make sure that your letter of intent contact information is accurate. This is the person that we send all communication to as it relates to the letter of intent. So make sure you have the person you want to be in that letter, that contact information. Your 2 to 3 sentence proposal summary is super important because this is one of the first things that reviewers look at. They get a sense about what it is you want to do. And oftentimes this is used to describe when in reviewing. This is a kind of a reminder to folks, this is the grant application or the letter of intent we're looking at. And then a brief description of the project. Remember, there are character counts in each of these. Spaces don't count, but any kind of commas or periods or whatever do count in your space numbers. You will have several questions that talk about what is the community need that you're addressing. So we want to know, sort of the why, what is the need that is being approached? And in addition, what are the target populations that you're looking at with this particular community need? And are there any disparities that are in existence as you look at this? This kind of question has come out of, we used to have lots more questions, and so we've tried to really hone in on what we're most interested in knowing about. We also want to know how you think about success. If it's a capital project, what will be the results of having these capital improvements? If it's an expansion project, what will be the measure of success? How will you know that what you're doing is doing what you intend for it to do? And then sort of a catch-all question, in what ways is your project innovative or transformative, compelling, or impactful? These are the things that we're very interested in as we think about funding those kinds of projects that in fact have the opportunity to be transformative for our community. And then we ask an open-ended question. Is there something we didn't ask that you really want us to know? So this is totally open-ended. You can include something or not. So that's what the intention of that question is. And then we have a budget section. At this point, our budgets are always $100,000. And that's what you will design your impact budget for. The project you have may be more than $100,000, and we will ask you to tell us about that if it's more than $100,000. And you will also have a chance to talk about the numbers, the opportunity to explain the numbers and any additional details. We have been able to reformat our budget template for this year, and we have actually included categories, and you can put in each of those categories the numbers that work for your $100,000 budget. If it is 0, just put a 0 in. And you can see we have things like salary, benefits, fees, equipment maintenance, supplies, transportation, travel, purchase or rental of real estate, construction fees, and anything else, and to describe anything additional. And you will see on the screen, it says $100,000. So this sample adds up to $100,000. So if you get to the end and it's not $100,000, go back and figure out where you need to make a change. So hopefully this is an improvement for us. We used to have to check all of these. So hopefully this will help to make sure that it does in fact add up to $100,000. So we have a lot of common questions that we ask, and so I just wanted to share just a couple of them, and then we will open it up for your questions as well. So will Impact 100 fund operating costs? So the answer to this is yes. We know that if you are expanding a program, starting up a new program, obviously there are costs for salaries and benefits and those kinds of things. So we do fund operating costs for this expansion or new project kind of idea. What we don't do is fund operating costs for ongoing operations at this point. A second question is, may we collaborate with another nonprofit in our application? And the answer is absolutely yes. While we don't fund re-granting, like if you were to receive a grant, you cannot give the money to someone else to actually implement the grant. But in terms of collaboration, if two different nonprofits are actually doing the work, absolutely we can fund that collaboration. If there are multiple nonprofits that are part of the application, one nonprofit must take the lead, And we will require, if you move on to the grant phase, to have financials from both organizations. May we submit more than one application from our nonprofit? We only accept one application per 501c3 status, so only one application coming under each EIN number. May we use the $100,000 grant over multiple years? Yes, any grant funds must be expended by 3 years, but they can be used in 1, 2, or 3 years. And that comes out of our grant agreement. When we, if you are a grant recipient, we work with you to determine the kind of methodology that you want in order to receive your grant funds. So these are a couple of the common questions that we get. And so at this point, I want to open it up for your questions. What questions do you have?
There aren't any questions in the chat yet, but feel free to put them, or if you want to raise your hand or take yourself off mute.
Yep, just take yourself off mute and ask a question.
I can start. Hi, Kathy. Thanks for the presentation. Appreciate it. Does Impact 100 have any funding priorities for this grant cycle or specific areas you're looking to target?
Great. So we have 5 focus areas in which we, we take a look at funding. We do not have targeted areas. For example, we're not saying, we're going to fund the arts or, so our 5 target areas, just as a reminder, are culture, education, health and wellness, environment preservation and recreation, and family. And when you submit your letter of intent, you will choose a focus area. And we recognize that there's a lot of overlap sometimes. And so we're just asking you to choose the one that best aligns with your project proposal. I will share with you that we're going to approach review a little bit differently. We have in the past reviewed by those focus areas. So all the ones that came in under family were reviewed under family. All those under health and wellness were reviewed under health and wellness. And one of the things that we found out is there were differing numbers of letters of intent that came in for each of those areas. And so we were looking for a way to be a little bit more equitable as we thought about the review process, and also give our members a better chance. One of the things that is important to members is many people, want to know more about the needs in the nonprofit community. What are needs in the community? Who's approaching those needs? How can we do that? And so we're going to try a new approach this year, and we are actually going to divide up the letters of intent applications by organizational budget. That we ask that question in your letter of intent: what is your full organizational budget? As well as by focus area. So each of the 5 review committees will have organizations that represent all 5 focus areas and a range of budget opportunities. Part of this came also from our recent experience in 2021. For our 20th anniversary, we were able to award what we called Next Step Awards. And these were smaller grants for organizations that have less than $500,000 organizational budgets. And we reviewed these. We had, I think, 50 some applications, and we reviewed them as a single pool of applicants. And we found that the focus areas, we were able to compare focus areas, an environmental project versus a family project, for example, without any difficulty. So we feel that this will be a more equitable approach, both for the nonprofit community as well as for an opportunity for our members to learn a whole lot more about the needs across the community and not just in one focus area.
Kathy, there's a question from Mary Leroy. If review committees will not be defined based on Impact 100's focus areas, could some LOIs be eliminated because some reviewers might not be familiar with critical details about a specific area, for example, health, environment, etc.? And Mary, maybe you can expand on this, but I think the process would still be the same. Sometimes there weren't necessarily Impact 100 member experts in family that served on the family committee or environment committee. There might have been an interest. Some people might have joined one of those committees because it was most convenient to their schedule. So I don't think the process would be any different as far as the possibility of LOIs being eliminated, because our members who are grant reviewers are not necessarily experts in a specific area. We've got women who are really interested in learning more about what the projects are and that our nonprofits do. So, and they take critical care to review the LOIs and the full grants completely. Did that answer your question, Mary?
The other thing that I would add is one of the learnings that came out of a recent grant application is the nonprofit felt that perhaps the reviewers didn't really understand the context of the application, and that could certainly be true. And so one of the things that we really encourage you to do as you submit applications is assume that people kind of don't know about what your context is, because our grant review teams are in fact, made up of a cross section of our members. We do feel that the interest areas that Jenny has referred to, we think we will get a cross section of those who are interested. But again, reviewers are not necessarily experts in any of these particular areas. So we rely on you to tell your stories in a way that that makes sense.
Kathy, this is a couple of more questions. I'll just read them. Can these funds be spread across multiple projects within one nonprofit? So the projects have to be defined. If it is more than one project, it has to be defined within the LOI, because that's what you would be held accountable for. I don't know if we've had that issue before as far as multiple projects in one LOI. Do you recall, Kathy?
I don't think so. I'm not aware of any.
I think the closest one we maybe had was the Center for Respite Care and St. Francis. They were rehabbing a building together, and they basically split the funds between the two. But we haven't had anything specifically with one organization with multiple projects, I believe.
Yeah. And Pamela asked, when we talk about transformational, do you mean the organization, the clients, or the larger community? So that's always a good question. Transformational, what is transformational? And I think in general, we would say it's transformational to the clients and the community. But transformational could mean, there's always the question about breadth and depth. It could mean really impactful for 30 people. It could be really impactful for 3,000 people. So there's no right or wrong answer. It can be either one of those can be considered transformational. Next question is, something was mentioned on the last webinar. I think we cleared that one up. Let's see.
I do see a question about working with an organization that is housed in Columbus, but that the project would be here. What Impact 100 requires is that the project or expansion or whatever it is exists within our 10-county region. If there's somebody else that is involved that's outside the region, that's all right if they're not spending the money outside the region, so to speak.
Right.
I see a question too about the grants given for less than 100,000. This is our, what we're talking about today is our Impact 100 $100,000 grant project. And so these grants are not for less than 100,000. If in the future we're able to continue our next step grants, that would be a possibility. We have not been able to determine that until we see what our 2022 membership dollars might be.
There's one more. Our project is being born out of a church partnership. Will we still qualify? So if the nonprofit is a 501c3 and it's not going money to the church itself or the religious institution itself, I think it would qualify. If it is a program that comes out of churches, which there are many of those that nonprofits that start as a result of that, that should qualify. But I think we just have to look at all those details.
Basically, we say we do not fund projects for church-related activities, but if it's a project and you have a 501c3 status or similar, and you're doing a kind of, I'm going to say social service kind of project, those can qualify.
We don't yet know how many grants that we'll be awarding. For the past however many years, 5-6 years, I think we've awarded 4 grants of $100,000 or more. And that is our hope, is that we get to $400,000 in our collective grant pool, which would mean 4 grants of $100,000. So that's what we're striving for. Membership is open.
You two can join. Erica.
Thank you. So you said something just a few minutes ago that made me question eligibility. So I actually sit in Cuyahoga County, which is quite far away from the counties that you're talking about, but we run a large program in I think three or four of the counties that you do. But is because our EIN, our 501c3 is situated in Cuyahoga County, even though our program delivery is in eligible counties, are we not eligible?
No, you would be eligible. It would simply be that any grant monies awarded would have to be spent in the 10 county regions.
Specific to those counties. Okay, thank you.
Right.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
The other thing we should, that often comes up as a question is, can you reapply for an Impact 100 grant if you've applied before? You're most certainly welcome to reapply. If you are in our current grant process and have been a recipient of our grant within the past 3 years, so that would be somebody that would have received a grant, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, but 2019, 20, or 21, you could not yet apply because our grants can be paid up to over 3 years.
So there's a question here about repeating the comments about another nonprofit or foundation to execute the grant. Again, we're looking for impact monies to be spent in our 10 county region. We have had applicants who the main organization resides outside of the region, but they are applying to expand a program, for example, in our region, and that is, they qualify for doing so.
I think maybe this one is also about, we don't allow pass-through grants. So if you're an organization that then passes all $100,000 onto another organization directly, that is ineligible. I think that's what this one might be referred to.
Okay. Annette, does that answer your question, or did we not understand it?
Sounds like
Thank you.
that. Am I missing any hands? Anybody else have questions? Jared, if applying for a program that has been applied for in the past but not awarded, it sounds like ongoing operating expenses are not eligible, but are program expansions. Well, operating expenses within a program that you are launching or expanding are acceptable. Just general operating expenses that are not project or program specific would not be funded. But anything, if you're, as I said, if you're expanding or launching a new program, then those expenses to operate that program would be included. And I think that's part of the more distinct, the layout of the budget at this point in the LOI.
Mm-hmm. So just to give you kind of an example, I'm thinking about one of our grant recipients in 2020, which was Women Helping Women, and they had been running a program in the city of Cincinnati, and they applied for funds to expand their program into 3 new areas. So in that case, they were hiring some additional people to expand their program, that kind of an idea. So, but if they had said, here's what we've been doing, for the last 3 years, fund that, we don't fund that.
How would we look at a new organization? They may not have all of the financials that an older organization would have, such as an audit, because it's only a year old. We do accept LOIs for organizations that don't have an audit, and there's some organizations that are older and still don't do audits, and that's okay. So you still have to provide as many financials as you have. If you're a year old, you would provide all the financials that you have for that year, and it would still be reviewed in the same way.
Sarah Grace has just put in the chat too, a suggestion that if you want to see our past recipients, they are on our website, excluding 2021, which is not up yet, at our website, impact100.org/CRimpact. So it'll give you a sense. We have awarded grants to organizations of all different sizes. And so the opportunity is there for lots of different kinds of things to be funded.
KJ, does staff support only cover new hires, or can this go towards current employees? I think that if I'm understanding the question correctly, in that LOI, we ask a staff support line. I think that's one of the lines. Sarah, you probably know that better than I do. But can this go towards current employees? Yes, I think it can. It doesn't mean you have to hire all new people to run the program. You could be shifting people over from another program or things like that. Thanks for posting that, Sarah, about the recordings for this training and others. And I think, Kathy, don't we have another session coming up where some of our past recipients and or finalists speak and
Yes.
share their experience?
Yes, we have a panelist. I'll hop to that question now. So next week, November 18th at 10 a.m., we have a panel of our 2021 grant recipients. We kind of interview them and you have an opportunity to ask them questions as well about what their experience was, any hints that they might have. One of the things that is always difficult in this process, both from a reviewer point of view as well as the nonprofit point of view, is the issue of feedback. And one of the things that Impact 100 commits to doing is to not coaching and to not giving specific feedback. And I know that's incredibly frustrating. In my life, I've been a grant writer and a grant applicant and received grants and not received grants. And it would be lovely to know, but in the impact system, as we kind of alluded to when we talked about our grant review teams, every year our grant review teams change. Different people sign up to be involved in them. Usually we have about 100 people that are, involved in the grant review process teams, but they're always a different group, different timelines and so forth, as well as the grant pool changes. So every year we have different grant applicants. So it's very difficult to say, what might go one year may or may not go another year. And we have lots of evidence that many applicants apply more than one time before they're finally a recipient. So it can be super discouraging and frustrating, I know. But if we were to tell you, oh, if you only do this, you'll be in, and then you're not in, that would be even worse. So I think that's another issue as well. So continue to think about your questions. There's one here about give our grants given to a volunteer organization. If you are a 501c3, you are eligible to apply. It's not about whether staff are paid or not. I don't know that we've ever had one that was all volunteer run, but we certainly have had some that have very small budgets, and they might have an executive director who takes a super small salary, that kind of thing. So that's certainly possible, but you do have to have the official nonprofit status. So let's go on and continue to think about any questions. Let me just sort of talk about the next steps, and then certainly we can continue to ask questions too. And funds can go toward a capital campaign, but not as a capital campaign per se. It must be, the Impact 100 must fund a very specific amount of a campaign. For example, in 2021, one of our recipients had already raised 200,000 of a 300,000 campaign, and our impact monies were the last 100,000. So here are some other things to look at on our website. There is a list of frequently asked questions on that particular site, so you can look through those. That's an extra thing that is on there. There are lots of training resources. If you go to the website, Sarah Grace has indicated some of them. So when you go to apply for a grant under both the apply for a grant and the application process, there are our training resources. There is from last year, our Grants Plus partner did a session on creating a compelling idea, and there is a worksheet there for you to help take a look, and you can also look at the presentation from there. And we also have something called a viability checklist, and this checklist gives you tips for completing the letter of intent. What this does is it's sort of a checklist to say, remember to do this. So it has everything to do with including your 501c3 status and those kinds of things, to reminding you to talk about why you're uniquely positioned to do this particular project that you're going to do. So it's sort of a checklist to make sure that you have included all of the relevant information. And that's the basic for use of that particular tool. So here are some of the things that are on the viability checklist, including not regranting funds, utilizing funds within the 3 years. These are all things that we have kind of talked about, but it is kind of a checklist that you can use to make sure that your message sort of gets through. Some people recommend having somebody who knows nothing about your organization kind of read your letter of intent for clarity. I think that's a great idea, because again, our reviewers are not necessarily content experts in the area that you all are content experts in your area. So just a reminder, you go to our website, apply for grants in the application process, and there are a couple places where it says, click on the letter of intent online submission form. Hopefully you've had a chance to at least take a look at that. As you fill out the letter of intent, if you're not doing it all in one sitting, you can save and continue and come back to it later. At the prompt, enter your email address or whoever is working on the letter of intent, and you will receive a link that you come back to that link in order to continue for your application. So this is something to, again, remember to put in the email address that you want the link sent to. Reminder, all of these must be received by noon on Friday, December 17th. Impact 100 will accept the most recently submitted version of your letter of intent. We will not accept those that are late, and we strongly encourage you to not wait till Friday, December 17th. And in case there are any glitches on your end, if there were any on our end, we would make accommodations, but we certainly hope not to have any glitches on that. We then work to kind of review the letters of intent and get them divided up for the grant review committees, which actually start in January. So December 17th, noon. This is just a reminder again about our grant application timeline. We'll know how many grants were awarded by mid to late January, and we will announce how many we will be awarded. If you are invited to a full grant application, that will be later in February. And if you don't move forward, we will notify you that you do not move forward as well. In early March, probably, there will be a training session somewhat like this about the grant application, opportunities to ask some questions about that as well. And the full grant applications will be due March the 18th. In May, we will be conducting site visits, and in June, the finalists are named. And again, our annual award celebration, fingers crossed, in person in September of 2022. I was just thinking about that this morning. We haven't been in person since 2019, so yuck. So hopefully it will work out. How many LOIs do we generally receive? It can vary anywhere from, I would say, 85 to 105-ish, something like that. Again, here's the information about our nonprofit panel presentation next week, November 18th at 10 a.m. You probably have received in your confirmations for this session, perhaps for the last session, information that allows you to register for this event. But if for some reason you don't, or you can't find it or whatever, you can go to impact100.org/events, go on the calendar and click on that to register for next week's information panel as well. So here is a question about difference between regranting and subcontracting funds. So regranting means you would receive the money and you turn around and give the money to some other individuals, or you are just simply a conduit for the money. In terms of working with subcontracting, let's say you're doing let me think of an example. So a couple of years ago, we had a collaboration between two entities. One was an arts organization and one was a refugee support organization. And the project was working with refugees and various arts kinds of projects. And one organization did the work that involved the arts part, and one organization did the work that involved training and so forth for refugees. So they collaborated. And so the one was the arts organization was fiscally responsible. So subcontracting is sort of like somebody's doing the work as opposed to just giving the money to somebody else for scholarships, for example. Jenny or Sarah Grace, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that was a good example. Yeah.
Again, the number of grants we're able to award is based on the number of women who we have contribute. So you are welcome to join. We'd be more than happy to have you, but certainly ask that you sort of spread the word and share the news if you have any opportunity to do so. That's super helpful. So we have time. Are there any more questions before we kind of wrap up? If you think of a question in the near future and want to send it to grants@impact100.org, we can try to answer those as well. I think I saw a question pop up. Oh, if we join Impact 100 and we work for a nonprofit, does that disqualify the nonprofit from a grant? Absolutely not. If you are a grant applicant, we would, ask that you probably join a different grant review team if you wanted to do that. Or if it were in the area you were in, you would obviously have to recuse yourself from any discussion about that nonprofit, but it does not disqualify in any shape or manner. If you see the two organizations are proposing something similar or could collaborate, do you try to connect them? This is a great question. We actually had this happen this year, but one of the things that happened is that they were in, two different review areas. And so one of the things that, we're going to do moving forward is to have some more touch points so that we know that that's a possibility. At this point, though, if they apply as two separate entities, we don't connect them during the process, but we might try to connect them moving forward if we see that. There's a question about, will all impact focus areas be represented in the LOIs that are approved? Yes, we will. As I said, we will divide them up by both organizational budget, and then we will spread out however many, if however many we, if we get, if we got 60 in health and wellness, we would just divide them out across the five teams.
I'm not sure, Mary, if that was your question, or did you mean that the finalists or those invited to complete a full grant application, if all 5 focus areas or all 5, if there would be nonprofits within each of those 5 focus areas that would be invited to go to the next step? I'm not sure if that was your question or not.
I guess I was asking to find out if all 5 of the focus areas, the final, or not the finalists, but the LOIs that were approved to complete an application would be represented, since you're changing your review format. And it seems like you get an uneven balance of the number of LOIs or applications from the different focus areas. So yes, the question was answered for me.
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
As I said earlier, one of the things that we know is that, focus areas are not an exact science. And so I would say a vast majority of our applications could often go in more than one category because they overlap, and it might be education about health and wellness or those kinds of things. So but again, these are the 5 focus areas that we look at applicants in. And one of the things that we learned in our Next Step Awards, as I said, the 3 areas that we did not require focus areas in our Next Step Awards, and we had about 50 applications. But if I were to personally, if I were to categorize those that received awards, one would probably have been family, one would have been education, and one would have been environment and preservation. So just sort of evolved in that particular way. So we're expecting that to happen in this particular area, that those that are most compelling and represent organizations in the community in the best ways will emerge. There's a question: if you're a member and your nonprofit makes it to the finalists, could you still vote at the end for the winner? Would I need to recuse? No, you would still have a vote. Just for information, if you are a $1,000 member, you get what is the equivalent of 1 full vote, and if you're a $500 member, it's weighted as a half vote, and that's the only distinction we make between full and half members, and nobody publishes it or whatever. So if you are open to and interested in joining, we totally welcome you to do so.
One other thing, going back to Stephanie's question, what we have every member complete is, and this would be done online, is a conflict of interest statement. So if you were representing a nonprofit, you could, and they happen to be a finalist, you would disclose that on that conflict of interest statement.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't prevent you from voting. One of the things that we work really hard is to maintain sort of this, to maintain an ethical standard. And so if you think about our grant review teams, we ask people to disclose if they have any conflict of interest or even an affiliation, because it can, it can influence, conversation. So sometimes it's a simple disclosure like, my great aunt Helen is on the board, or, something like that, which, is a, not a direct, but, it could also be, my husband's the nonprofit executive director or something. So it's just in all fairness for the ethics of the conversation. And sometimes people do, in fact, have to recuse themselves from a conversation because of an affiliation, a chair of the board or something like that. Any other questions? Well, I think we have reached the end of the questions. We really appreciate you being here, your support and interest in potentially applying for a grant with Impact 100. We know that the nonprofit community is the heart of so many things that are right in our community, and we just applaud you for all that you do to help make it a better place. Again, if you have final questions that didn't get answered today, or you think of it as you're working, please send an email to grants@impact100, and we'll try to answer the questions, and hope to see all of you next week at our nonprofit panel, November 18th at 10 a.m. Thanks for being here. Have a great day.
Thank you again.